Well, hello and a warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show. Delighted to be joined by Ben Habib, the leader of Advance UK and chairman of the Great British PAC. Ben, we've been looking at your thoughts, let me put it that way, rather than policies, because those are yet to be formulated, but you will come back and unpack those. Let's have a look at the policing and so on and so forth. And you're very clear on this about stop policing tweets and having zero tolerance to real crime. Talk to me about this sort of side then. Obviously, after arrests for anti-migrant posts, would you decriminalise online hate entirely, even if it spikes riots like Southport?
We have perfectly enforceable laws that shut down incitement to violence. You don't need anything beyond that. We already have them. And one of the problems, I think, with the criminal justice system, the police in particular, is that they too have been hijacked by DEI, progressive discrimination. They make their decisions based on the regulatory and legislative framework. So they can't, you can't really hold the police responsible until you change that framework. Because the police are basically also being told that if you're from an ethnic minority, you need a break. If you're a minority religious belief, if you're Muslim, you need some sort of special treatment. That's what they're being told. And that's inherently wrong. And one of the issues I have with politicians who say they're going to be tough on crime, employ another 20,000 police officers. Well, what's the point of employing another 20,000 police officers if all of them are going to be taught the same nonsense about DEI and then go back to their computer screens and just look at what's going on X, and if there's any kind of prejudice going on X, that they're going to police? This idea of first of all, we should abolish the concept of a non-crime hate incident. It's Orwellian because it's non-crime by definition. So why the hell are the police even looking at it? It's just got to go. I don't care if people are offensive. I don't care if they're racist to each other from a policing perspective. It's not a police matter to be racist. It's a police matter if they're inciting violence or they're causing disturbance through what they're saying. You can't arrest someone because they hold prejudices that you disagree with. That's completely wrong. That's not the police's job. We need to educate people not to be racist. That comes through education. That comes through being brought up properly. It's not. Are you with me? It's not
Oh
a
no,
police
absolutely,
matter.
and I think it's always that
Yeah.
balance. And I speak up publicly myself about this all the time. Everybody sort of gives lip service to freedom of speech until they get offended, and then they want to shut it down. And you have ludicrous examples like Graham Linehan, who basically the Father Ted comedy writer, who was joking about, and it was a joke that if you find a trans person in the ladies' bathroom, you kick them in the balls. Well, they're not supposed to have balls if they're trans. But all the issues that he had, fortunately, that case is not proceeding. But it used to be, well, Descartes, wasn't he, who said that I think, therefore I am. Well, in current Britain, I think, therefore I am arrested. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
We need to be able to have a proper conversation. But it's working out, isn't it, Ben? Where's the balance between freedom of speech and what breaches the law? Where would you draw that line?
Well, I wouldn't draw it at any point other than the point at which it was drawn in the 1980s. I can't remember the year of the Public Order Act, but I think it's 1986. And that has laws in it that prevent incitement to violence, etc. And that's sufficient. Why do we need to move beyond that?
Yeah,
It's
and
enough.
it's proving the causal link as well, isn't it? Because the problem is at the moment it's incitement to hatred, which is very different. But because
Very
incitement
different.
to violence, you can turn around and say, okay, there must be a causal link between what somebody says with the intention to cause that, and then the person who carries out that act as a result of it, you need to look at their intention as well.
Yeah, it becomes impossible. How,
Yeah.
how do you judge someone's intention? You've got to look at whether or not what they said was likely, in my mind, the bar's got to be set at violence.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very, very clear on that. And that's an ongoing discussion that the law does need to be tidied up regarding that sort of side. Digital ID, protecting privacy and so on and so forth. It's key to Yvette Cooper's migrant tracking. That's what they argue. How do you dismantle it without losing border data? And what's plan B for identity in a cashless society?
Explain to me how you get border data through digital ID.
Yeah, I know. This is what she's trying to say around,
I
isn't it?
know,
She's
but it's nonsense, isn't it? Because those people who've got into the country illegally are not going to have digital ID anyway. They're the ones. it's again, it's Orwellian in the way that they're selling it because it's so evidently not going to trap people who haven't got digital ID. The whole point is they're already here illegally. They can't get a job at the moment. They shouldn't be able to get a job at the moment because they haven't got a national insurance number. They shouldn't be able to cross our borders because they haven't got a passport. They shouldn't be able to drive a car because they haven't got a driving license. But they do all of this in breach of our laws. And having a digital ID merely polices those who are already in possession of a national insurance number, a British passport, and a driving license, etc., etc., etc. They're selling a lie. So digital ID just needs to be revoked. If they put it in, an advanced UK government will revoke it. End of
And
story.
how do you respond to people who say, well, look, all of this, we've got 70 times a day you're filmed on CCTV thing. Every time you use your loyalty card or your mobile phone, we're tracking information about you. That information's already out there. How do you respond to that?
If it's already out there, then be content with it. You've got it. So relax. We don't need the digital ID.
Well, they're saying you put it all in one place, it'll make it cheaper and easier.
What? So you give up your ability to control your own, you give up your civil liberties and you expose yourself to hackers because it's convenient. It's a bit like the argument they've made in favor of the EU. Oh, what a shame. We won't be able to walk through the e-gates anymore. Really? You give up your sovereignty in favor of walking through e-gates? I mean, it's topsy-turvy thinking.
Yeah, you make the point, and it's a recent Advance UK post. You cannot build a strong nation without faith, family, and tradition, is what it says. And the states replaced all three with control, dependency, and debt. And it's the rallying cry: restore! It's time to restore the moral and cultural roots of Britain.
I think that's right.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, they go on and say that British universities were once the envy of the world. Now they're laboratories for Marxist ideology, rewarding activism over merit and silencing dissent. This is not progress, it's a decay disguised as virtue. We must save them.
I think that's right too. I mean, you know, we the root causes of these problems we've discussed, but this is their manifestation now. This is what's happening. This might be interesting for you and for viewers. If you do a search on the government website for what is far right terrorism, it defines it as using violence or intimidation to deliver the political aims and wait for it, cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism. They regard cultural nationalism as a far right ideology. They then go on to say white nationalism and white supremacy. Now, I can understand that white supremacy is potentially, not potentially, that is an ideology which is wrong. Um, but cultural nationalism is merely believing in the settled state of a culture of a nation. That is the definition of a society. That is the definition of a nation. So the government is actually telling us that if you believe in this country, if you believe in a settled culture for this country, you are far right. That's what the government of this country is saying.
It is quite extraordinary. And as you know, I'm not a fan of labels. We've spoken about this beforehand, and people want to shut down debate by putting a label on it, don't they?
Well, that's it. Exactly.
Crazy. Let's look at your Rachel Reeves. Let's look at the finance and the budget crisis has also been hitting the headline this week. The OBR has just handed Reeves a 20 billion productivity black hole. You've warned that excessive taxation kills growth. Talk to me, though. Let me know your tweet. I'll remind you of this, or posting rather on X. On October the 27th, you said, when will these idiots realize that excessive taxation reduces economic activity, damages capital values and the economy, resulting in less tax being collected? Talk to me then, Ben. How would Advance reverse this perfect storm of imported inflation and bond jitters in your first budget? What would you do?
So let's just first understand one thing. If you wish to prevent an individual from doing something, such as speeding, you impose a fine on them, don't you? They get flashed by a camera and they get fined. Taxation is a fine. And the reason they get fined when they break the speed limit is because you want to deter them from doing that. So when you tax people when they work, actually what you're doing is creating an impediment to work. you're telling people don't work. That's what taxation is. When you tax people on work, you're basically saying you're fining them for working. So we want the minimum amount of tax required in order to function as a state, to provide the very basic functions that a state needs to provide. Because any taxation beyond that is an impediment to wealth creation by definition. And we know that because you stop speeding every time you get a penalty fee. So we know what the impact of taxation is. It's to deter work. So we want the lowest possible taxation. We have a level of tax as a proportion of GDP that it's the highest it's been since World War II. So the notion that Rachel Reeves can sort the problems of the country out by taxing us even more, in other words, penalizing us even more for working, is fundamentally wrong. We should be able to reach that conclusion in the few minutes that I hope I've made it clear on this program, that further taxation is not going to solve this country's problems. It is going to create more problems. What she has to do is bite the unpalatable bullet of welfare and overspend, net zero, benefits for foreigners, foreign aid, massive welfare payments, rewarding people who are staying at home rather than people who are working. And then she's got to cut taxes at the same time as making sure that people can't live at home with doing nothing. She's got to make it attractive to work. She's got to remove the penalties of work so that people feel that they can go into work. Instead of being a country that redistributes an ever diminishing level of wealth, we need to become a country that creates wealth. And you can only do that by having aspiration. You can only have aspiration if you're allowed to keep what you earn. If you're not allowed to keep what you earn, you will stop working. And it's that basic, Andrew.
Yeah.
It's that basic.
Oh no, absolutely. Well, Kemi Badenoch's come out. I mean, it seems inevitable. Everything ringing in people's ears about the Labour promise not to raise taxes. She comes up with this sound bite saying, "Well, if Rachel Reeves raises tax, give her the axe." You've also talked about Rachel Reeves being caught red-handed on the rental license hypocrisy. Is this the tipping point for a no confidence vote?
No, I don't think so. No, this Labour government's got far too big a majority, and they don't give a damn. I mean, the digital ID is perhaps one of the most unpopular policies they've come out with. They've come out with a lot of unpopular stuff, but I think there's a groundswell of opinion against it, and yet they're going to drive it through anyway.
Yeah. And do you think it's their poll tax moment? People have said that's the case.
Yeah, but I mean, Maggie's poll tax moment resulted in her being ejected from office. It may be Starmer's poll tax moment, but it's not going to result in an election or a vote of no confidence in the government and the government falling. I don't see that happening.
Okay, let's talk about the army. We touched on diversity and your views there. One of the horrible headlines again today about the army safety for women and JC Beck, that particular case. It said that the army's not safe for young women 4 years after the particular daughter's suicide post her assault. The actual penalty the person received seemed quite minuscule in comparison. What's your view on the army and safety for women within the army?
Well, I think women, let's just have a very frank discussion about this. Of course, to the extent that women are employed in the armed forces or indeed the police, they should be treated with respect and with care and with all the social civilities that any colleague is treated amongst colleagues. Of course, that's the case. But women are not as physically strong as men. And actually, I think we are putting far too many women in frontline police services and frontline army services, in the front line, who are not perhaps able physically to do that job. So there's two issues here. One is, how are you treated by the army if you're a woman? And of course, that should be with utmost respect, like they should treat men, and with civility and social standards being adhered to, etc. That doesn't mean that you can't be disciplined. You must be supremely disciplined. But the physical demands made of a soldier can be quite dramatic, and to assume in the pursuit of some form of equality, that women should be allowed, for example, to have these frontline combat roles on an equal footing with men in terms of numbers. In other words, an equal outcome of the number of women in frontline roles. I think that's fundamentally stupid, isn't it?
Well, I think you make well. There's 2 points there, isn't there? One is this horrible case and how that should be dealt with. It does seem as though that the punishment was minuscule in comparison with the crime. And the second is this the celebration which we touched on, where they're sort of celebrating the dedication of a new LGBT plus armed forces memorial, which you
Yeah.
made a post on that saying, "How about focusing on defending the country?" is what you said, and the government, advanced UK government, would sack anyone in the MOD wasting taxpayers' money and time on this nonsense. So, I mean, there are two issues there, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. There are two issues, and I hope I separated them out. Um, you've got to treat any member of any organization must be treated by that organization and other members in it with all the social civilities and care and respect that should be afforded to any member of an organization. That goes without saying. But it's interesting, you talked about the penalty not being severe enough. And I think this again comes back to an earlier conversation we had in this podcast, where I was talking about how criminals are now effectively given a protective blanket and victims are thrown under a bus because victims have already been assaulted. And because of the Human Rights Act, we're trying to protect the criminals. We're trying to protect them from being assaulted, even though they should actually be prosecuted with the full force of the law and have the book thrown at them. And this is where we're becoming topsy-turvy as a country. One of the many places we're becoming topsy-turvy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we need to sort of look at that. And as you say, all respect in these conversations about victims and so on and so forth. In terms of, and that's why it's so important to separate the two. One is about the effectiveness of the job, but when there's criminal activity, then appropriate steps need to be taken. The pages have been polluted with stories about the royal family. The royal family, just put it in perspective, brings in about 2.5 billion contribution to the economy through tourism and various other things. Obviously, the artist, or formerly, or whatever it is, formerly known as Prince Andrew, has now been demoted. He's now plain Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and he's packing his 72 teddy bears and leaving Royal Lodge. What's your take on all of this? And would Advance push further and say he shouldn't be eighth in line for succession?
I think he's had. I couldn't care whether he's eighth in line for succession or not. I think the country's got many bigger problems to deal with than whether Andrew is eighth in line for the throne. A lot of people would have to die for him to become king, and he's quite old already, isn't he? Whether it was right for him to be stripped, absolutely. I think the man is clearly despicable, even after Epstein was revealed as being a predatory sexual abuser. um, Andrew went on being friends with him and, has clearly got some issue in his mind. He can't get it straight. And it would seem that he had an inappropriate relationship with that lady who committed suicide and potentially others and so on. So Andrew seems to be a bad one. And I think it's right that he should be stripped and pushed out. Um, Probably, should he be in eighth in line? As I say, the country's got bigger issues to deal with. I don't think he's ever going to be king, but if I have to make a decision, if I'm stripping him of being a prince, strip him of that too.
Yeah, and what's your views? I appreciate their personal views at the moment about the royal family. Are they value for money, or should they also have cuts?
So the royal family, I think, um, need to be judged as distinct from the individuals who happen to be in the royal family at the moment, and we mustn't conflate the two. And I think the fact that we have a royal family and that part of our constitutional framework should remain. We shouldn't ditch that. Do I think King Charles is thinking straight all the time? He says and does a few things which I don't fully agree with.
You mentioned some of those in posts. Elaborate on that. I mean, you've talked about he's supposed to be
Well,
defender of the faith as opposed to the faiths and so on and so forth. Elaborate
yeah.
on your views on King Charles.
So, well, he's pro net zero and he's bought into all of that. He seems to be pro DEI. He talks about this country being a multi-faith country. I think these are utterances from a monarch who doesn't fully understand the role he should be playing, in my mind. Um, and he is King of England. He's head of the church. We are constitutionally a Christian country. That's why the bishops, at least so far, still sit in the House of Lords. Um, and we mustn't forget that's why he opens Parliament, etc. And we mustn't forget that those traditions are more than just traditions. They act as a kind of stability on the tiller of governance. And the country takes security from its existence. And it certainly worked extremely well under Queen Elizabeth. And, as a king, I don't think he's doing that bad a job. It's just I think he does a perfectly all right job. It's just some of the things he says are just a bit weird.
So would you reform royal funding to tie allowances to marriage stability or other
Again,
factors?
again, it's not the foremost big task we're facing. We're facing such big issues, such big issues. I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
An advanced UK government in 5 years won't have time to get to that level.
Okay. All interesting. So, finally, I always like this bit when you're looking forward to then before the next time you come on the program as a regular. What can we expect over the next few weeks or days from you and from Advance?
Yeah, so we hope to get our electoral registration quite soon, and that I think would be a big moment. We're rolling out our regional framework now. We're piloting a few areas, so we'll have on the ground fighting campaigning teams using military metaphor again. We'll have our army of people across the United Kingdom fighting for Advance UK. And I think that's really important for all the reasons we've discussed earlier in this podcast. And we're coming out with our policies, hopefully in the next to 9 months. We'll try and take a holistic, coherent approach to it. So we may not be announcing policies on their own, because often when you have a policy on a subject, it has an impact on another subject. And in order to answer that question, you need to come out with policies on both, and so on. So we'll we'll make sure we've got the right framework when we do start making announcements. And we're going to just get more candidates, get more speakers, get more members of the college, do more events, and hopefully one day mainstream media may decide to re-engage with us, and we'll be on screens. But I'll still very much look forward to coming on your show, Andrew. Obviously,
It's always a delight. We've loved this journey, and in terms of
yeah.
when they do become policy, I mean, people are going to be criticizing Rachel Reeves. It does look as though she's going to be backpedaling on the no tax rise to the ordinary folk. That horrible weasel words. Does look as though that promise is not going to be kept. What do you think the penalties should be for political parties who don't stick to their manifesto?
Well, her penalty is coming. He's going to be turfed out of office. The next government ain't going to be Labour. The
But in
next
terms of,
government,
would you take
uh,
it further and say it's like a contractual pledge to the electorate? Because they always sort of say about politicians, and I say, look, trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and trust in politicians, in law, in the media is at an all-time low. How would you restore that trust?
well, I think the way you do it is not by legislating for it. I think you need to do it by raising the standards of the game yourself. And one of the things that I've said about Advance is that we'll come out with a manifesto, but we're also going to come out with draft legislation backing up that manifesto. At the time of publishing the manifesto, the draft legislation will form part of the manifesto, so that we get a democratic mandate, not for some airy fairy policies, but the actual legislation with which we're going to walk into the Commons on that first day, which is why we can then just slap it down on the table and say, pass this. And if you do what we're doing, then trust with the British people will be immediately restored. They may choose not to vote, all of them, for us, because they don't like what's in our manifesto, in our draft legislation, but they will know precisely what they're getting. Those who do vote for us, and if they're the majority, they will know precisely what they're getting. And we too will be backed into a corner because we've done it to such fine detail that we've got to deliver it. And and that's what I want. I want politicians to promise what it is that they genuinely mean to deliver, and then deliver it. And I think the way to make sure that happens is to be one of those kinds of politicians, one of those parties, perhaps the first party in history to do that. But we must raise the standard as opposed to legislating for the standard. Does that make sense?
It totally does. The first party in history. There we go. That'll be a fantastic name. Ben Habib, an absolute delight as always. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, Andrew. Hello, folks. I'm Ben Habib. I'm leader of Advance UK. I'm just going on a brilliant podcast, which I'm sure will be a brilliant podcast with Andrew Eborn. Please subscribe to Andrew Eborn's channel. He's a first-class journalist, and I thoroughly recommend him to you.